Hello, everyone. Hello, students, community members, members of the Alliance for the Study of the Holocaust and Genocide. Today is the beginning of our 43rd annual lecture series. Today is also Holocaust Remembrance Day. It is the 81st anniversary of the Red Army's liberation of Auschwitz. Now, I want to confess that I've written and rewritten the introduction to today's event numerous times, trying to stay current with a news cycle that repeatedly tests our beliefs about the world we inhabit. This weekend, I gave up trying. So instead, I want to speak for a moment about our theme for the semester, making sense of genocide in an age of intolerance. And I think we can agree that we inhabit an age of intolerance, even if we differ on its causes. Serious people, such as the historian Tim Snyder, compare our age to other dark moments in human history, such as the last scramble among European powers for empire at the end of the 19th century, or the years leading up to the First World War, when the international framework that mostly kept the peace in Europe crumbled. And then I think most troublingly, the collapse of the Weimar democracy and the rise of the German Third Reich in 1933. And perhaps you think that such comparisons are overwrought, and I pray that you are correct. But these comparisons are common. And they're not merely an affliction of people on the left. So last week, the conservative writer Bret Stephens saw the shadows of Thomas Mann's great novel about Europe's fragmentation, The Magic Mountain, at the Davos World Economic Forum. And at Davos, controversy hinged on the potential splintering of NATO amid American demands for the annexation of Greenland. So perhaps the great minds of the past, like Thomas Mann, are trying to warn us where such initiatives invariably lead. And this brings me to today's event with the Jewish-Palestinian Living Room Dialogue Group. The day will come when the present acrimony and violence will subside, and the world will look for different skill sets in its political leaders. And I hope at that moment, you will recognize the importance of the ability to disagree respectfully and peacefully with each other. Because the dream of a world where our political opponents are utterly and forever vanquished is dystopian. It is grist for an Arthur Koestler novel. So it is with similar thoughts in mind that I invited the Living Room Dialogue Group to join us today. They will begin our semester with a discussion about how people with very different hopes and experiences, people who in a different context might be sworn enemies, have learned to listen to each other. Finally, the members of the dialogue group have asked that I not introduce them individually. They want their own stories to serve as their introductions.
This is very exciting to be here, and I want to thank Dr. Bittner for inviting us to have this opportunity to help you launch your 43rd annual series about Holocaust and genocide. It's very, very important. And we represent the Jewish-Palestinian. We used to be Living Room, but we've outgrown it, and that's a good thing. And so we are here to talk to you about the work that we do that we think could be a model in how to move forward in a world that is very alienated, as you all well know. We use compassionate listening, and it provides an environment where the most challenging issues like Holocaust, ethnic cleansing, destruction of life support systems, and especially genocide, these are issues that make understanding and trust extremely difficult. But it's a place where we can explore those meanings, those words, and what it means to each one of us personally. But I thought I would begin by giving a little background about who we are and how we got here today, by sharing a story about our roots in Beyond War that started some 32, 33 years ago. And I have some pictures that you can see are rather dated, but they show the history. And it is this history that brings us here today. And we like to start by talking about the earth. In any presentation, we always point out that all of us, it doesn't matter how old we are, where we live, our ethnic background, our religious background, we are all interrelated and totally dependent on this beautiful planet Earth. And it's very important for us to acknowledge that, I think, as we live our daily lives. So back in the early 1980s, a group of citizens in California got very concerned about the threat of nuclear war between the Soviets and Americans. And we started a group called Beyond War. And it was Beyond War that began to lead to the history and what brings us here today. Part of that 10-year period during the 80s, a group of American and Soviet scientists came together, and they actually wrote this book called Breakthrough: Emerging New Thinking. Soviet and Western scholars issue a challenge to build a world beyond war. You could say that we still need to address this even more than ever. During the Beyond War years, between 1983 and 1990, we would give an award to a group, an individual, or nations that did something significant to move us towards a world beyond war. In 1989, two groups were honored at the same time: Koinonia, Southern Africa, and Neva Shalom, Wahada Salam. Koinonia, Southern Africa was about Blacks and whites coming together for meal sharing, which they did in public. They went on picnics, they met in churches, and that was the beginning of breaking down apartheid. At the same time, we honored Neva Shalom, Wahada Salam, a village in Israel where the Israelis and the Palestinians lived together, sharing their personal lives every day, going to school together, working out their differences. And that village still exists today, even though they struggle to make it happen. It's very challenging. And it was those two programs that gave us the idea of having a Jewish-Palestinian conference. So in 1991, we brought together citizen leaders from Israel and Palestine to a seminar ground in California. And the facilitator was Dr. Harold Saunders, who was a Secretary of State under Carter, and he worked and was part of the Camp David Accords. And a statement that he made kind of carried on in our work through the years, ever since then, where he said there are some things only governments can do, such as negotiating binding agreements. But there are some things only citizens outside government can do, such as changing human relationship. And that sentence and that idea was very important to our way of thinking in our work. And after that conference, then we started two things. Because of the inspiration of the Koinonia Southern Africa work, we started a Black and white meal sharing here in the Bay Area. And it was intended to be together for a year, and we ended up being lifelong friends. And at the same time, we started the Jewish-Palestinian Living Room Dialogue. And that was slow and hard to come by because people on both sides, both Palestinians and Jews, were very nervous about coming together and sitting together. They were fearful of what their own people would say and think. They would feel that they were betraying their people. So it was a challenge. But once there was a kind of a groundswell and people started saying, okay, they wanted to give it a try. Then we worked together, and after several years, we were able to put on this incredible dinner. And you can see the dinner. 420 Palestinians and Jews came to this dinner. It was in a restaurant near the San Francisco airport. And there was a big sign out there that said, welcome Jews and Palestinians building a common future. And because of that dinner, and because it drew so much attention, then the living room dialogue started getting requests from the press and from television, and they wanted to come and know more about who we were, what we were doing, and why. And so you can see that there were some news articles, Jews, Palestinians at area dinner for put Mideast peace on the table. Jews and Palestinians in dialogue groups try to expand goals. And the news would, whenever something would happen in the Middle East, they would come to the living room dialogue and say, what do you think? What's going to happen? And we became the kind of the voice for the local Jews and Palestinians. And at the same time, we started getting requests that other people wanted to start dialogue groups like this. They just couldn't believe that Jews and Palestinians could actually sit together and build relationship. So we started creating visuals and information to send to people who were asking for help. And one of the quotes that we always referred to says, an enemy is one whose story you have not heard, which is the basis of what we do. We also started talking about the difference between usual communication and dialogue, and how it differentiates in our daily lives and can become more useful. And we also talked about how, when you look at these two icebergs, you know that most of the story about each other is hidden, and we hardly even know each other. So anyway, these were tools that we started sending to other people so they could start their own dialogue groups. And here was television coming to visit the living room. And then from 2003 to 2007, we then launched into our biggest project, which was to have the Jewish-Palestinian Family Peacemakers Camp. And for 5 summers, we brought Palestinians and Jews from the Middle East to a camp here in California, and where they could live together, share their stories, talk about their histories. It was an incredible experience and kind of a model, a breakthrough for the way that other people could have camps and experiences like this, bringing people together. And as time went on, we started getting more requests to come into the local high schools. We made films and documentaries. We worked with the university students on campuses. You can see the Earth flag in the middle of the floor. We worked with the Muslim youth. We worked with communities at large. We went to Fresno, California, where they'd had some struggles in their community about Jewish-Palestinian activities, and we had this dialogue experience. We even did use Skype and helped facilitate beginning activities in Singapore at Singapore University. We facilitated Japanese and Korean reconciliation, all by Skype. And then in 2010, the dialogue was invited to go to Nigeria to work with the Christians and Muslims who had been at war and were at war. And at first we said, no, we can't go. That's too scary, too dangerous. And then we realized that no, we had all this material we used at this Jewish-Palestinian peacemakers camp. And we took all those materials and all of those story sharings and activities to Nigeria and used the same process with them, and it was incredible. And they made a movie of that experience that then kind of spread to other African countries. They came together in Côte d'Ivoire, began tribalism, wars between tribes. They brought people together to educate about albinism, a physical handicap that is misunderstood in African countries. In DR Congo, they worked with people with handicaps and married couples. And then we ended up taking the Jewish-Palestinian materials to conferences and peace conferences, and a way to just spread the idea about listening and compassionate listening to each other, and the power of sharing personal stories. And that is the way this Jewish-Palestinian living room got its roots. It started, and it continues today. And after October 7th, it became even more important and prominent, and people started coming and saying, does the dialogue group still work? And yes, indeed. And so the point of showing these pictures and about the activities in other countries is just to say that this process of what we're presenting to you today can be used in any country, between any groups of people. It's something that is important in your families, in your communities at large, on the job. This way of listening to each other, to build trust, to build a heart connection, that is what is going to change the world and help us get along and figure out a future that works for everyone. And so Miriam, now.
This is my first time on the lovely Sonoma State University campus, but I must say I'm very impressed. And as a retired university professor, I did some sleuthing, and the course offerings here are very impressive in terms of the breadth and depth of what is available. So congratulations, those of you who are students, for choosing SSU. I have been tasked to explain how we are using the terms Holocaust and genocide in a dialogue presentation. Dialogue, as we heard from Libby, transforms enemies into friends, whether in face-to-face group, interpersonally, or among nation states. Dialogue begins with personal story. My story begins with my father, a 1937 refugee from Nazi Germany. Dad was strongly patriotic. He couldn't wait to become an American citizen so he could go back, he could join the army, go back to Europe and fight the Nazis. In those days, you had to be an American citizen before you could join the army. As part of an advanced medical battalion, he was behind the advancing front lines with Patton's Third Army. As such, he was a liberator of the concentration camp Buchenwald. He had both survivors and liberators' guilt. And as his daughter, and as a Holocaust educator for 25 years at Notre Dame de Namur University in Belmont, I became a self-defined Holocaust Jew. I was trying to explain to a non-Jewish friend recently, what does it mean to be a Holocaust Jew? I tried to type the word audio into my phone, and Auschwitz popped up. In my Holocaust class, students learned that the slogan, "Never again," applies to all people. And I'm sure those of you who are in Dr. Bitten's class learned that again. But in today's world, the slogan seems to have morphed into "ever again," as a rabbi pointed out recently. But as a Holocaust Jew, I see the world through a Holocaust lens. The hollow-eyed, starving children of Gaza look no different to me than pictures of children during the Holocaust, on starvation rations or no rations at all. Reports that Gazans had no water, food, or electricity remind me of the Warsaw Ghetto before the uprising. when the Nazis turned the water off at random and there was a shortage of everything. Now, when I see the rubble of Gaza, it reminds me of the rubble of the Warsaw Ghetto after the uprising. As a Holocaust Jew, I refuse to be a bystander. I must stand and speak out. Yet with cousins living in Tel Aviv and with a tremendous love for Israel, it is painful for me to hear the charge of genocide to describe what has happened and is happening in Gaza. I have tried to clarify my own feelings about it, and I admit I'm still working on it. Dialogue enables participants to have productive conversations around difficult topics like genocide and Holocaust, with safety and without violence. We are here today not to resolve the issue, but to understand different perspectives. Dialogue requires deep listening and an openness to be changed. This afternoon, you are about to witness dialogue in action as two Jews and two Palestinians relate their stories and demonstrate compassionate engagement. In dialogue, we see one another's humanity instead of a stereotype, and we humanize instead of dehumanize. To conclude, we in the dialogue group have an ambitious agenda. We hope to create a public peace process in the Middle East. One student, one story, and one relationship at a time. Our panel presentations are next. Two Palestinians and two Jews will introduce themselves by telling you their stories.
Can you hear me okay? Hi, my name is Mark Botto. I was born in San Francisco, California, to Christian Palestinian parents. My father, Elias, was one of 8 children, was born in Jerusalem and became a refugee in Bethlehem during the Nakba in 1948. His father, my grandfather, was a successful developer and had buildings and land in Jerusalem. In 1948, right after the Nakba, my father, who was 16, was at his house, and the British military came to the house and told his family that they needed to evacuate and that they could probably come back in a couple of weeks, but the fighting was getting close. So they needed to pack a few things and just take off for a few weeks. That was over 78 years ago. And my father and his family were never able to go back to their home. My grandfather never recovered from the trauma of losing everything. On his deathbed, he heard one of his favorite Arabic songs playing on a stereo called "We Shall Return." It brought tears to his eyes as he realized he would never be able to return home. At his funeral, a relative who had recently visited Jerusalem brought a handful of soil to put in his casket. So at the very least, he could be buried with part of his homeland. My father came to San Francisco in 1954 after finishing college in Beirut to search for a better life. Several years later, he started the process of bringing some of his siblings and parents to America. In the summer of 1962, he went to visit his brother and sister who were living in Santiago, Chile, as was a large Palestinian community at that time, and still to this day. There he met my mother, whose own family had relocated to Chile in the early 1900s after World War I. He and my mother married 6 weeks later and eventually had me, one of 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. Growing up as a Palestinian in the US during the 70s and 80s was a deeply confusing experience, even in the melting pot of the San Francisco Bay Area. While I appreciated having a very large and supportive family with our fun and rowdy Sunday dinners that were the size of small wedding parties, it wasn't popular to be Palestinian outside of my family. We were labeled terrorists by the media, and I was called camel jockey and other colorful names that I won't repeat in front of you folks here. At home, my parents always had the news on in the background. And when it turned to issues involving the Middle East, my father would rail against the injustices he and his family endured at the hands of the Zionist settlers. As a kid, I grew tired of the anger and bitterness he expressed at the dinner table. And being young, I couldn't relate to it, so I eventually just learned to tune him out. All of this made me want to distance myself from my identity even more, so I learned to take advantage of the fact my last name is Italian and I have fair-colored skin. I learned the art of passing as a white person, and I felt particularly vulnerable to innuendo and insults. But as I grew older, I started to reconnect with my Palestinian identity, which did leave me open to shocking prejudice, both intended and unintended. In college, I remember being told by a fellow student with whom I was having a political conversation that I should get a homeland before expressing any opinions. In the early 2000s, I was working for an investment bank here in the Bay Area, and a summer intern who had worked for me, who happened to be Jewish and Israeli, didn't know my ethnic background, and we're at lunch. The discussion turned political, and he said, well, all Palestinians are terrorists. And then I told him that I was Palestinian. He thought I was joking, but he quickly realized I wasn't. After lunch, I invited him into my office and told him how it felt to hear him say that. I also told him that I believe 99% of Palestinians and Israelis are good people that want to live a peaceful life, but that the 1% on both sides want anything but. I still believe this to be true. And despite what happened on October 7th, 2023, and the months and years that have followed. When news broke of that attack and the murder of civilians in Israel at the hands of Hamas terrorists, I felt sick to my stomach and sadness for those killed or taken hostage, as well as for their loved ones. But I also immediately feared the response of the Israeli government would be heavy-handed, lopsided, and indiscriminate to who they targeted. I felt that this would give the apartheid Israeli government a free pass to continue their genocidal atrocities against all Palestinians in the name of having a right to defend itself and in the name of having a right to exist. I was terrified for my family friends who live in the West Bank with their young children. As the months and years of the Israeli bombardment have drawn on, despite the ceasefire this past October and as the death toll of innocent Palestinians, women and children chief among them, has grown to the tens of thousands, my faith in humanity is challenged to the point where I fear becoming numb. The one silver lining since October 7th is that an international light now shines on the plight of Palestinians, an ordeal that has been unfolding for almost 80 years. Before the October 7th attacks, I felt like my humanity as a Palestinian was invisible. But for the first time in my life, I feel the world recognizes my people worthy of fairness and justice and deserving of a homeland. Excuse me. The atrocities of the past 2+ years have also prompted me to become involved in the Jewish-Palestinian dialogue group, as Libby described, the same one that my father joined in the early 90s and the founding of the group. Over the years, I watched how he transformed because of this group. He was able to see more than one perspective and hold more than one truth. I watched his anger lessen and his heart soften, so much so that when he was in his 70s, he was finally able to express his affection to his children and actually say the words, "love you," which I had assumed years earlier was a bridge too far. After the events of October 7th, I knew I also needed to participate in the healing act of dialogue for my own heart and to carry on with my dad's legacy. I believe that it's in listening to each other's stories with a truly open heart that a person is best able to see the humanity in another, even someone that might be labeled the other or the enemy. I believe it's our only hope for a future of peace. In 2022, my father passed away suddenly, and I think about him every day, about everything he lost, and about the love and compassion that deepened within him as he got older. I hope to spread his ashes in his homeland in the near future, but in the meantime, I hope to embody all that he came to embrace: openness, compassion, and peace. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here, and I thank Professor Bittner and all the people who organized it, and also the Libby and all the people from the Jewish-Palestinian Dialogue Group. My name is Noam Szoke, and I was born in Israel in 1961 to a secular Jewish family. My father survived the Holocaust in Budapest, where most of his extended family was killed. He was 15 when the war started, and escaped on foot in 1959 and made his way to Israel at the age of 19. My mother grew up in England, and in her own way, she was also a Holocaust survivor. When she was 7, her parents, fearing a Nazi invasion, sent her and her sister on a boat to the United States to live with relatives. She lived here apart from her parents for 4 years. After her family was reunited, they moved to Israel, and that's where my parents met at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem in 1957. My childhood was a whiplashing alternation of 3 years living in Israel, then 2 or 3 years living in the United States, and back to Israel, back to the United States. We moved back and forth many times. I never lived in one house more than 3 years of my childhood. So I grew up bilingual and somewhat bicultural. My predominant memories from Israel center on my extended family and peers and the strong sense of community that we had. When I was 13, my family settled in the United States. And when I was 16, we moved to the San Francisco Bay Area, where I've lived ever since. My older brothers and all my extended family still live in Israel. When we moved to the United States the last time, I was very unhappy. I experienced a few years of profound isolation and alienation from my peers. I eventually adjusted to American culture, but this experience had a strong impact on me. In some ways, it led to lifelong identification as an outsider. In high school, I wrote an editorial for my school newspaper. It was called "Ignorance Will Lead to Racial Conflicts." And its tone, as I look back on it, is really a little cringeworthy. It's like a teenager who knows everything. But I still stand by what I said and the intention, and I feel the truth of it now more than ever. This is one of many small steps that, in hindsight, brought me eventually to the Palestinian Jewish dialogue room. In about 2016, I met Kothar Duncan. We worked together in the San Francisco School District Math Department, and we quickly realized that we had a lot in common. We were both immigrants from the Middle East, and we came to the US at similar ages. When we started sharing our stories with each other, it became clear that there were also huge differences in our experiences. Kothar and her family were refugees from Lebanon and Syria. I remember Kothar telling me about her family's flight to the United States, the close calls, and the painful memories of the people they left behind. She also told me about her experiences in the US after 9/11 and the Islamophobia she endured. Her stories had a strong impact on me. I was struck when I realized that at the age of 54, I had never had an Arab friend in my life, despite living as a neighbor with Arabs for half of my childhood due to the segregation in Israel. When I was growing up, there were implicit and explicit messages all around me that Arabs were our enemy, that they were a threat. I was in kindergarten during the '67 war and have memories of being in an air raid shelter. At home, though, there was a different message. One of the things my father said to us very clearly was, "The Arabs are our cousins." When I told Kothar this, we started calling each other cousin. To this day, we greet each other as cousin, and that is so sweet. There's something very healing for me about having an Arab friend, an Arab cousin. During the pandemic, Kothar and I got even closer. My mom was ill, and Kothar had a new daughter, so we were both very emotional and raw, and we stayed in each other's inner circles. Then October 7th happened. The next day, Kothar contacted me and said, "How is your family? How are you?" It was a very normal, simple gesture, but I didn't hear it from almost anyone else. And it touched me deeply. So after October 7th, Kothar and I began a ritual. We call it our shared grief ritual. We get together every few weeks and share our grief with each other. Grief over the horror of what is happening in Palestine and Israel. And we don't compare, or we don't make hierarchies, because grief is grief. Some of my first feelings after October 7th were feelings of guilt. When I was a kid in Israel, my friends would say to each other, naively but in all sincerity, "These adults are out of their minds. How can they be continually fighting and think this is going to solve anything? When we're adults, there'll be peace, because when we're adults, we'll figure this all out." After October 7th, I came face to face with the realization that we had not succeeded. I had, of course, known this most of my life, and yet for so many years, I'd gone along with pretending that everything was okay. Well, not great, but okay. And the narrative that the occupation was not something that could be solved. I have had a difficult time interacting with my family in Israel and walking the line of sometimes feeling mad at them and other times realizing the extent of the difficulties that they're experiencing without comparing it to what people in Gaza are experiencing. I continue to struggle to open my heart, to be compassionate to all of it, and to speak honestly with my Israeli family, and to have the grief without the comparisons. I don't know how I would have made it through these last 2.5 years without Kothar, the person who I've been able to talk to most honestly and most forthrightly about what has happened and what is happening. She has consistently met my grief and guilt and confusion without judging it or comparing it or asking for explanations. And she has just as consistently shared with me her grief over the suffering, her own feelings about the fact that she and her children are well fed and safe while others live in hunger and terror, and her anger at the dehumanization of Palestinians, which is an anger that I share. At some point, Kothar and I began talking about expanding our conversation to include other Jews and Arabs. Around that time, I was visiting my great aunt Ginny in San Diego. I talked to her about my friendship with Kothar. And she said that years ago, she and my dad's cousin, also a Holocaust survivor from Hungary, were part of a Jewish-Palestinian dialogue group. I started looking for this Jewish-Palestinian dialogue group. It took me a year to find them, but finally I did, and here I am. It's been wonderful to get to know Jews and Arabs who are interested in real dialogue. Together, we're building a bridge of common humanity, not common experience or even common opinion, but common humanity that I feel is the only hope for a peaceful future. I just want to give one example of the kind of conversation that we have in the group and that I've had with Kothar, and it's around the use of the word Zionism. This word is often used as a verbal weapon and a source of divisiveness. We know that it has many and nuanced meanings. By telling our stories, we're able to hear those nuances as lived experiences instead of slogans or generalizations or accusations. For my father, Zionism was associated with his ability to immigrate to a country, Israel, where for the first time in generations, he could feel safe as a Jew. For my Palestinian friends, Zionism and the creation of the same state, Israel, resulted in the death and expulsions of their family from their homes and lands. Both of these are truths. Dialogue can help us transcend the two-dimensional dehumanizing that is the cause and consequence of verbal and physical violence. My hurt, my grief doesn't lessen yours, and yours doesn't lessen mine. This can help us see and feel that the other too, just like me, wants to be safe and wants to be free. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Emily and Mark, for amazing stories. My name is Catrene Malshey. I want to start by considering all of the pain and losses that both sides, Palestinians and Jews, have gone through with taking, although I don't have a lot of time, 10 seconds of, or a couple of moments of just silence to respect and honor all the beautiful souls that have come. I define myself as a mother, first of all. My daughter Mia is here, she's 21. My son Antonio is at home and he's 22. I am a Christian Arab Israeli / Palestinian. I am all of it. My father is from Kufr Kanna, which is Kana of Galilee, small town next to Nazareth, and my mother is from Nazareth, or was. My parents married in 1977 in Haifa in a Roman Orthodox church. So we were a minority of the minority. We're Arabs, but we're Christians. We're not Catholic. We're Israelis, but not Israelis. We're Arab of 48 is what they call us. I immigrated to the States in 2002. But before I immigrated, obviously, I had family here in Colorado. My mother's side of the family left Nazareth 3 months after I was born. The whole history of the family was always go for good opportunities, better opportunities, and always better your life and go towards joy as much as possible. I was born in 79. Obviously, I was a child of the 80s, and during the 80s, there was a war with Lebanon. And I often thought about the children of Lebanon, how much they have endured. But the borders were closed, and sometimes we saw Christian families come from Lebanon to seek shelter. I was always super eager to meet them. My mother was the main influence of my life and childhood. She was beautiful, elegant. She had a career in the IRS, which is an Israeli institution. And she was the first Arab, really, Palestinian as a female as well in the company. She was also the first woman to earn a driver's license in Nazareth, and my grandpa bought her a yellow convertible Subaru. So needless to say, many people knew her. Haifa, where I'm from, is a city of Jews, Muslims, Christians, Druze, and Baha'is, and other religions all living together relatively peacefully. And I say relatively because it's not like we talk super openly about our opinions in terms of politics or religion, for that matter. People try to stay neutral and enjoy the beach, and you can always find everyone coming together because of a good shawarma. I remember many times there were conversations growing up about how this is not really our country, we are just guests here. And I remember from a very early age, I would contemplate and say, aren't we guests in life in general? What does that even mean? And I never really found good answers. And I tried to ask people like the deeper questions of what are we doing? Why are we so afraid of each other? Like I used to love certain holidays like Hanukkah and Purim because I'd see the festivities in the streets and I remember we didn't participate. And vice versa for Christmas. And there wasn't a lot of integration within the communities. In a nutshell, life changed very, very quickly for me from being an innocent child in the 90s to having to grow up very, very fast. The Soviet Union had collapsed and many Russians and Ethiopians, Jews moved to Israel and moved to Haifa very rapidly, as in the thousands on a weekly basis. And that changed the whole culture of the city. Real estate went up. I remember there was just a whole sense of insecurity, scarcity, lack of abundance, just stress. Very shortly after that, in 92, the Gulf War erupted with Iraq, and it was terror for me. It was very, very scary. I think in the whole war that lasted about a month, there were maybe 22, 23 missiles fired at Israel, but there were hundreds that were fired at Iraqis, and obviously there were many casualties. I was very surprised by the fact that we can call it winning when so many people died. I didn't understand many concepts, but I knew my life had a lot to do with war and conflict because I saw also what's coming was clearly going to be more conflict. It just didn't feel peaceful at all. Very shortly after that, which was months, my mother passed away from cancer. I was 13 and I took on responsibility for raising my younger brother and sister who are 6 or 7 years younger than me. They still live in Israel. And I have an older sister who's a year older than me, but we both took on responsibilities as children that were way beyond our age. I knew that I needed to immigrate and I knew that I would never raise a family in Israel because of the difficulties, because of how much hatred I saw, because of many, many things that happened after. At that time in the 90s, the president Rabin was assassinated. After it, there were a lot of suicide bombers. There was then a second intifada in the late 90s and early 2000s. I was a student in Haifa University. I studied social work, and one of the routes to the university, the buses was bombed by a suicide bomber. So things that we used to think, well, that's at the border or that's far away, started moving closer and closer to our neighborhoods and to our affected our lifestyle tremendously. It just was, for me, another reason why to immigrate. I would fantasize about being an American, and I thought, you know, the life of freedom and liberty and the equal opportunity for all, there is a place for it, and I'm going there, come, you know, whatever it takes. When I moved to the United States in 2002, I felt like this is it. This is happiness. I've made it, and everything in Israel in terms of war, in terms of Arabs hating Jews, Jews hating Arabs, all of it is behind me, and I'm just gonna hear about it maybe from family members, but it's the past. I felt like I shut the door. Needless to say, that wasn't true. And in 2006, I saw Haifa on the news, breaking news. Maxim restaurant was bombed. Maxim was a restaurant and is a restaurant still owned by a Christian Arab family and a Jewish family. And it is a symbol of peace. And I'm not going to talk about their menu because it is incredible. But it was bombed by a Muslim woman who pretended to be pregnant. One of the, it's my best friend's family by marriage restaurant. So I knew many of the people who passed that day. I knew the bodyguard who didn't check her because he wanted to be polite. Because she looked like she was, you know, almost due. And that affected me very, very harshly. I didn't know where to take that grief. I was obviously on the phone with family and friends. It broke my heart to see people that are from my community, Jews, Arabs, Druze. I mean, many people go to eat at that restaurant on a Saturday. And it was again that symbol of what is happening with the three religions. Why? I just couldn't explain it. And it felt like the more I tried, the more it felt like I'm explaining insanity. 2008, I then saw again Haifa breaking news on CNN while I was working here as a social worker. My uncle was killed by a missile from Lebanon while he was having coffee outside in Haifa. The missile fell in Wadi Nisnas, and his mother also passed away from the shock and the noise of the missile due to a heart attack. It was also very, but I don't even know how to explain that feeling of sadness, to see my family members on the news screaming and crying and recognizing pretty much every face. May he rest in peace. I shortly after that started studying social work as a master's degree in Colorado State University. Excuse my tears, it's such a passionate topic of mine. That's because I'm tired. This water is for us. I had a very, very strong, amazing spiritual teacher who told me once, you can't cry and drink water at the same time, so. When I was studying and doing my master's degree in social work, and social work, as we all know, have a lot to do with healing, working with people, mental health, mental illness, and a lot of individualized treatment plans and a lot of view of the human experience from either a group or individual. I started taking a lot of those theories, and it really helped me understand a little bit better that the individual here is, for me, the Palestinians, and the other individual is the Jews. And that led me to write a book about it, because I just felt like, oh my gosh, I feel like we are here to learn from each other. And I feel like we're, in a way, soulmates, not in a romantic way, because not all soulmates are twin flames, but some soulmates come to your life to teach you hard lessons, in my eyes. And I started seeing that the Palestinian story and the Jewish story have so much in common in terms of pain and grief, and what is bringing them together is that loss, and where they're stuck in that whole grief process is rage and anger. And I felt like if I could just, as I help myself heal and still do, take that up on another level and help spread the word of peace and love as much as possible, because I feel like eventually that is where we're headed, despite all the negativity and how hopeless it seems sometimes. So I realized that I just want to sing about it and write songs, which I did, and I done many shows with Palestinian musicians and Israeli Muslims, Christians, Druze in one band. And I can tell you that the electricity and the energy when we do music together is beyond phenomenal. I've always felt like I was levitating. And there's a line in the movie Joe Black where the dad wants his daughter to sing with rapture and levitate, and it's just, he's telling her all these stories about how he wants her to fall in love. But I feel that way whenever I do music together, Israeli and Palestinian. I feel like the sky is the limit. When I moved to the Bay Area, I went to Mendocino Middle Eastern Music Camp, where I met Israelis and Palestinians and Jordanians and Egyptians. I met more Arabs in that camp, more I did in the Middle East. And everybody just comes together because of music. So I started doing more music and met Asaf Ophir, who was going to the dialogue group, and that's how I ended up coming to the dialogue group and participating. And felt like, this is beautiful. The fact that we can have and share opinions that are so difficult, so difficult, but give each other the space and listen was just amazing. I fell in love with it immediately. I did a couple of music concerts with Asaf, who's an amazing clarinet player, an Israeli musician. And we ended up raising money. We raised over $10,000, and it was split the money between two nonprofits, one Palestinian and one Israeli. On October 7th, I was watching Fleet Day, which was an Air Force show of war jets in San Francisco, while my family was pretty much getting jets parked in Haifa and land because of real war. And I thought, that is just a crazy coincidence that I'm watching them do an art show while my family is watching them come to fight. On that night, before that night, which was October 6th, I woke up with like heart attack symptoms, and it went away, but I never felt that pain in my heart. And I thought, that is very, very strange. And I know myself enough by now to where when I feel something in my body that is, for example, of pain, maybe it has to do with people back home. I always have that in the back of my mind because of how many things we have been through. I was in disbelief, needless to say, when I heard from my family, and I was watching the news like everyone else every day, and it just made me feel like it gives me more fuel and more reason why to do the work that I do, from writing to singing to acting. The first short film, independent film movie that I booked, I was a Palestinian mom helping my child while an Israeli soldier shot. And I thought, again, life keeps bringing me back to the conflict, although I'm thousands of miles away, because of clearly my heritage, but also how much I want to do about the problem, the conflict, and how much I want people, and I want to see people move past it. I wholeheartedly do. I want to, there's so much that I feel like I want to say. The stories are endless, but in a nutshell, I've also written a book, a love story about a Palestinian woman who falls in love with an Israeli soldier that will also be very soon be published. It was hard to find a publisher, and it was hard lately to find musicians who want to do more work together with music for peace or messages of love. But I found it, and there's still music going on. And the nice part about it for me is every time I hear someone say this is not the right time, I feel more convinced that it is the right time, because I do feel as human beings, we are on the cutting edge of change, real change to the core. And I truly wholeheartedly believe that we all want to give our children a better life. With Libby's presentation and seeing the universe and seeing you wear the earth necklace, which is beautiful, I just want to bring out the point that in my eyes, it's not a coincidence that Israel on earth has the lowest point on earth. And if the earth is one as a body and we compare it to our body, our lowest point is our feet. And I feel like if the lowest point, which is the feet, is hurt and wounded, it is really hard for us to move forward. Yes, there are conflicts like the Palestinian and Israeli happening worldwide in different countries between different ethnic groups. Absolutely, yes. I'm not saying that the Israeli, Jewish, and Palestinian conflict is the most important, but it's not a coincidence that there's so much money and energy and countries that have invested. Gosh, I mean, I don't know if anybody in here can give a number on how much money was sent to the Israeli army and in support and or donations to Israel. I mean, the dollar amount can build nations. But I don't believe that it is a coincidence and that it is time for it to heal and that we can do it together. In 2013, I wrote a song called Insan. And in a nutshell, it means it doesn't matter if you are Jewish, Arabic, Muslim, or Christian. What matters is that we're all human beings. And until time catches up with this fact, we're going to keep playing music. شو همي إنك عربي، شو همي إنك يهودي، شو همي إنك مسلم، شو همي إنك مسيحي. مش كلنا إنسان وعايشين بهالزمان وتيوع الزمان ألف لي ألحان. لو مشان شاتا عربي، لو مشان شاتا يهودي، لو مشان شاتا مسلمي، لو مشان شاتا نصري. كلانو أدم بخيم بعולם. ועד שיתעורר הזמן, תנגן לי שירים. Thank you.
Thank you, Catrene and Mark. Boy, if any, I didn't realize it was going to be so hard to be the last one speaking because the emotional baggage of everything that came before is just laying here on the floor, and we're going to have to deal with it. If any of us thought that anything about this was simple, it just really isn't. So, my name is Ben Linder. I'm an Israeli American. I'm also a sixth generation Jewish Jerusalemite. And unpacking that a little means my father's family came back to Jerusalem from Poland in 1870. Okay? And it took them 3 months to get there. It wasn't fun. And they fled Poland because of anti-Jewish pogroms or riots that made them unwelcome, unsafe, and it forced them to return. And I use the word return very consciously because they didn't migrate there because it was a great place to go. They returned there because it was the only homeland that they knew. They were gone for over 1,500 years after being driven out by the Romans, but it was legitimately for them a return. And so I grew up with that, and that the weight of that history, for me, has always given me a feeling of indigeneity to the place. So I grew up there in Jerusalem until age 11. And, you know, to me, there was never a question of belonging. I didn't feel like a settler. I didn't feel like a colonialist. I felt like this was my place to be. And the soul of that place belonged to me and my family. I grew up there in Jerusalem, steeped in this mythology. Some might call it brainwashing that most Israelis grow up with. The collective generational trauma of Holocaust survivors didn't really affect my family, but it was in the water. It was all around me. All around me was this heaviness of friends, families, and people that I met who were really broken fundamentally after surviving the Holocaust. And you had that in your family. People wouldn't get into a Volkswagen or a Mercedes because it was too traumatizing. And for many, many years, German orchestras were not invited to play in Israel. So it was all around, and the phrase "never again" was really practically etched into everything. There was also a mythology of the birth of the state of Israel that we Jewish children grew up with. And I say we Jewish children because we were segregated. I had never met a Muslim or a Christian my entire childhood in Israel. My neighborhood was 100% Jewish. My school was 100% Jewish. The school system is segregated between Jews and Arabs. Okay, so that's really important to realize that people aren't just born prejudiced. They're raised to be prejudiced. And I really came to terms with that. My parents were involved in the birth of the state of Israel. My parents were both involved in the Jewish underground in the mid-40s, fighting the British at the time. They weren't really even fighting Arabs. They were fighting the British for their liberation. And they were both involved in the underground. And as a matter of fact, my father was labeled a terrorist by the British. Kind of interesting, given how we've sort of flipped the story around. My father was wounded during the War of Independence, the Israeli War of Independence. We called it the War of Independence, but my Palestinian friends called it the Nakba, okay, or the catastrophe. And they're two sides of the same coin. When I was 9 years old, my parents in Jerusalem warned me never to pick up any toys on the street because there was a rash of booby-trapped toys that had bombs in them and were laid by Palestinians. And everything I saw on the street became this symbol of danger from the evil Arabs, right? That's how I grew up. My parents decided to leave when I was 11. I believe the reason is they wanted to rescue me and my sister from that life. They didn't want me to serve in the army. And we came to America. I found this country to be just an amazing place. What was most amazing to me was the way in which all minorities, ethnic groups, nationalities kind of blend together in what's called a melting pot, right? That was very different than Israel. Like two 180 degrees, because there, everyone was separate. Here, everyone strove to become American, right? And it was this layer of tolerance. It's a lot of fault with it, right? I mean, there's obviously a lot of racism and a lot of underlying, sort of inequality. But compared to a place like, the Middle East, it's paradise, right? So I grew up in the United States, went to high school, and then went to college. And I went to college in the mid to late 80s. And what were we doing in college? We were demonstrating against apartheid and demonstrating against nuclear arms and trying to cleanse the world of what Libby was doing, which was this eternal drive to war. But it's there that I came to terms with reconciling being a liberal politically as an American and having to apply that liberalism or learn how to relate that liberalism to my experiences in Israel and my family. 14 of my first cousins still live in Israel with all of their families. So that's where my majority of my family is. And, I remember reading a book. Somebody gave me a book called The Tragedy of Zionism by Bernard Avishai, who has been a really seminal author on the subject of kind of trying to analyze how did Israel become what it is? And how did Zionism turn into what has become really Jewish supremacy? How did it go from a something that was a progressive effort to create a modern Jewish state into something that became an instrument of segregation? I moved to San Francisco after college, and I came out here, and for the first time ever in San Francisco, I met a group of Palestinians and Jews who were getting together regularly for social events and evenings of long conversations. It wasn't an organized dialogue group, but it was kind of a single scene made up of liberal Jews and Palestinians and Arabs. And I met this amazing woman, Emily Shahade, a woman in her 50s who ran these groups. And I have this vivid memory of being invited to her dinner at her house for the first time. And, smelling her home cooking and tasting it and realizing that it kind of smelled like stuff my mom was cooking. It kind of tasted like stuff my mom would. Again, the food angle. And they taught me a completely different narrative of what happened in 1948. They taught me about the Nakba. They taught me how our liberation as Jews meant their dispossession as Palestinians. And, dozens of years later, and kind of dozens of books later, and dozens and thousands of conversations later, it really made me able to see what we have here as this luxury and this privilege of distance that we Israelis, Jews, Muslims, Christians, Palestinians can sit here in this country and view what's happening there and do it with a little bit of detachment. Of course, we feel all the emotion, but we're able to look at it rationally and see the forest for the trees. Now, October 7th was a complete earthquake. Not only there, where it shattered Israelis' notion of security, it shattered their bubble of believing that the conflict could be managed and kind of put away. But it also shattered the hope of Palestinians for an eventual and just solution. The resulting travesty and genocide in Gaza was worse than anybody thought possible. And many of us in the community here the Jewish community started, fighting and having internal conflict about it. Because so many of us can't even verbalize the word, can't verbalize the concept that Israelis were capable of doing to others what this trauma of the Holocaust had inflicted on us. And so that was a very, very, difficult thing to overcome. So I feel like an outsider pretty much in all of my communities. Except for the joint spaces that I have with my Palestinian friends. I made many enemies in the Israeli and Jewish community in Silicon Valley. I'm shunned by my cousins in Israel. I keep telling Israelis that I meet here that living here does give us a privilege and that we owe it to our families back home to really dive deep into these discussions. I do most of my work politically with an organization called J Street. That organization is a liberal Jewish lobbying organization in Washington, D.C. That works towards furthering both the rights of Jews to a homeland, the rights of Palestinians to a homeland, and a fight here and there for democracy. And kind of that's how I spend my energy, and I try to do good with this effort. It's kind of an and culture, using the word and recognizing that they have a right and we have a right, and we all have an obligation to pursue peace and justice. It's that kind of nuanced thinking that I think we need in order to come out of this. And Palestinians who are participating in this are called normalizers. Jews who are participating in this kind of work are called self-hating. And I think that's okay. Talking to each other is really the only way we can get ourselves out of this. So thank you very much.
But by tradition, we always reserve the first question or first few questions for students in the class. So if you have a question, please raise your hand.
This is more of a clarification. You mentioned being checked for bombs before entering a restaurant, or someone was not checked for a bomb before entering. Is that standard practice? I'm not really aware myself.
That was the bombing of Restaurant Maxime in 2006. The lady was not checked because she was pregnant and he was being polite.
Is it standard practice in Haifa to check people before entering spaces?
Oh yeah. I mean, last time I was there was in 2023. There were security at the mall. There's security everywhere back home. And after when the suicide bombing started in the 90s, they made it into a law where if you have a business over certain square meters, you have to hire a security guard.
It's very common to walk through a metal detector to just go somewhere like
the mall.
That's true. No chairs. Other questions? Yeah, please stand up and introduce yourself. Knox didn't say her name.
Aaron, it sounds like a lot of you were pretty open-minded from the start. What would you say to people who come from places and where they have seen nothing, taught nothing, are still in that place of hatred of people different from them?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so I will repeat the question. So Aaron, the asker said that it seems like you're all very open-minded. What is your advice for people who come from places who might not, where others are not so open-minded? Yeah, no.
I mean, I think that part of the reason we're in dialogue is just to model that. Like, look, I am taught, I told my brother in Israel who doesn't I don't know if you're watching, Danny, but hi, who doesn't wanna, who is not, he's not thrilled with what I'm doing, that I have a Palestinian friend. And that is all I can do, really. You know, I can't change his mind, but I can model that here's another human being. And as long as he sees me as a human being and I see this other person as a human being, maybe by transitive property, he can see that. I don't know. That's my best answer.
I would say that also we didn't start all as being open-minded. I didn't for sure. And you have to be hungry for it. You have to be hungry for a better way. If somebody's hungry and there is a huge buffet, I can't eat for them. You have to eat, digest it, and be willing and ask. But if someone is in a place of one way and everybody else is wrong or closed-minded, honestly, I would honestly feel sad because it's part of the reason why we're in the boat that we're in today with the fighting.
Can I just add?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, a key moment was learning that two stories about the same event can be opposite and can both be true. Because truth is going to be in the eye of the beholder and the experience of the teller of the story. And so I think that starting from there is a good way to come into the situation of saying, my story is true, but there may be someone else with a story about the same thing that is different, and creating the tolerance for that.
Other questions? Yeah.
It's not so much a question. I just wanted to say that everybody's story was very beautiful and really touching. And I couldn't imagine experiencing something like that. When I went to school in Santa Cruz, the year was cut short because there was so much like hate speech on campus and vandalism, and then there was like days on end of like protests and all of that stuff. And I would say being that close to it really gives you more of a perspective. I think it's easy to separate yourself from the situation and be naive about stuff, but that was definitely a really important moment in changing a lot of people's perspectives on the situation. So I just wanted to thank you for sharing.
Yeah, your name and
I'm Sarah. Thank you. And I just want to know, when you talk to friends or family back home, do you ever change their perspective or their viewpoint on anything? Or is it hard to do that?
I'll start. Oh, yeah. Prior to October 7th, I was making a lot of progress with 2 out of my 14 cousins. Post October 7th, one of them doesn't speak to me anymore. And one of them just says, let's not ever talk about politics. So
I think you have to meet people where they are. I mean, dialogue is great in that you don't have to try to convince somebody of your point of view. You just have to communicate your true feelings, and it's their job to listen with an open heart. And that's what dialogue is all about. It's not, I may not agree with everybody's story, but I appreciate hearing them and I respect them, and I definitely respect their humanity.
I have something too. Yeah, I actually have 2 things. One is my cousin's kids came to the US about a year ago for their honeymoon. And so they're in their late 20s, and one of them had spent a lot of time in the IDF during the fighting since October 7th. Don't know what they did, but we're in there. And they came to San Francisco and we met for coffee and they said to me, they showed me a picture they had taken of a sign in a window that said Free Palestine. And they said to me, isn't this anti-Semitism? And I said, that's not how I see it. How I see it is that people here see the tens of thousands of Palestinians being killed and displaced and starved, and they don't like that. That's what I see. And they heard me and they told me that in Israel, they don't see that. They literally don't see that on Israeli media. So I wasn't trying to change their mind, but I was telling them my perspective and I was listening to their perspective so I could see where they were coming.
I had similar experience too. My sister doesn't talk to me back home because of this topic, and no one in my family read anything that I've ever written. But sometimes I listen, and then the conversation moves quickly to fashion or music. Food especially.
We had a hand up back here.
Hi, I'm Sam. How, when like talking to someone for the first time about kind of very heated and passionate topics like this, how do you open that and how do you like actually start a respectful conversation?
Come to the workshop tomorrow at.
There was we go to the dialogue group and I intentionally found ways to find common grounds. I think again it starts with imagination and focus, and when you want something you can find a way. Otherwise, yeah, you can live your life in a bubble and be naive and not know and not care to know. So it does require a little bit of caring. Believe it or not that much. So a little bit goes a long ways.
Hi, I'm Eva, and I remember the gentleman had mentioned what the term Zionism meant to his father. And since it's so contentious these days, and for so many, it is associated with so settler colonialism, and for others, it is a homeland for Jews. Where does the discourse go from here? Because I even was reading yesterday, like a vendor in San Francisco was asked to not be a part of the farmers market anymore because he was wearing an anti-Zionist t-shirt. So that kind of freedom of speech against Zionism, but not Judaism, because they're not synonymous from my understanding. So like, where does that conversation move from? I know this isn't a very clear, concise question, but yeah, what is your perspective on that, on the term in general, on people labeling anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, and like, is there a way to turn that term around positively, or should we just kind of write it off as maybe everyone should collectively agree that it is not anti-Semitic? Or obviously they agree on that, we wouldn't be here. But yeah, what's your opinion on just the use of the term and this?
What I was trying to convey with my story is that if I say Zionism is good and you say Zionism is bad, that's just a recipe for fighting. But my father's story is a story that shows one of the results of Zionism, the creation of the state of Israel, was a place for my father to go safely. That's not that, I mean, that is my story, that is his story, his story. And at the same time, as Mark was sharing, the creation of the state of Israel led to his family's expulsion and loss of their home. Those are both true. So I think that if we go for the word, is Zionism this, is it that? That's not really the right question to ask. The right question is, what was your story? What is my story? And how do we go forward from those stories?
What does it mean for like modern Zionist movements, I suppose?
You'd have to unpack that. I'm not going to make a sort of a a definitive statement about modern Zionist movements, because what are you talking about? You'd have to unpack it with stories. So, I mean, what I can say is that I'm glad my father had a safe place to go to. And I can also say that I'm heartbroken that Mark's family was dispossessed from their house. That I can say definitively.
Ben?
Let me address the weaponization of anti-Semitism a little bit, because there is a conflation of criticism of Israel and anti-Semitism, and it's being weaponized by a lot of people on the right to silence speech and as a weapon against liberal universities, for example. And to me, it's painful to see it because I feel used, and I feel that the Jewish community is being used by mostly non-Jews to say, to label universities as anti-Semitic and use that as a cudgel to force them into actions that fit a specific agenda. So I'll just say it definitively that my work is about promoting the fact that criticism of Israel and its actions is not inherently anti-Semitic. And that's what I believe.
So I think we have time for one more question. The last question is, of course, the greatest privilege in the classroom. Yeah. Hand up right there. Please stand up and project. Yeah.
Hi, my name is HT. Sorry, I was hovering my hand because I was trying to figure out how I wanted to phrase the question. I feel like a lot of the people who are in power in these countries probably hold the stance of like feeling an extreme to one sort and maybe wouldn't want to engage in dialogue. In your experience just through the Living Room Dialogue Center, in what way can you envision a path to peace using dialogue or using any other methods that would make like a bigger impact on the greater situation? I don't know if that's a great question because I feel like dialogue like helps the people make the change, but I don't know if you have an opinion on how that can make an impact on the leaders.
I'm not a politician. I wouldn't know how to answer that other than seeing that people in terms of movement of ideas and ideology, eventually we are always, in my eyes as a social worker, meant to go toward the better. Like even if you fall and you hurt your knee and it's bleeding, even if you don't do anything or put a band-aid or give it any treatment, eventually it's going to heal. Eventually the skin is going to close up and it will stop bleeding on its own. You didn't sit and think, I should send brain cells to that wound and close it. You didn't necessarily give command. Healing happens whether you want to or not on a physical level. And I see it spiritually is the same way. People move toward better. If someone is wounded spiritually or politically or because of genocide, because of war, those are all deep and abuse. Those are deep wounds in the human experience. I think naturally it's going to move toward healing whether you want to or not. And it may look very, very ugly, like what happened on October 7th. That is very, very ugly. But many people can argue that anger and acting in such insanity is better than oppression. So it actually is an improvement. It's not necessarily just anger out of nothing. So I think that healing has many shapes and many forms, but it is happening whether we give it command or not. That's my answer to that.
I think in terms, you were asking about the leaders, the politicians that are leading the countries that can actually make a difference. I think it has to start with them looking within themselves in terms of their intentionality. What is their real intention? If their intention is to say the right thing so they get reelected, so they get what they want, that's one thing. But if their intention is for real peace, then I think that opens the door for dialogue. How do you start that? I don't know. But I think it has to start with, or part of it is them looking within themselves. I mean, it's not and that wouldn't be a politically a wise thing to do necessarily. So I don't know how we get at it politically. Don't know. Do you have any ideas?
Well, one of the most magical moments for me as a kid was when Anwar Sadat came to Jerusalem and spoke in front of the Israeli parliament. This is a country that was at war for, dozens of years with Israel. 1973, the war had just ended, the Yom Kippur War. And then less than 5 years later, here he is, just his initiative to come there and give a speech in front of the Israeli parliament, which paved the way for peace. So, changes can happen, and often, you have to have, but he didn't come because it was just his idea. There was a lot of dialogue happening at lower levels before, and kind of to what you were saying, you have to start somewhere for it to eventually make its way to the right place.
Can I say something really quick? If there's time.
Very quick.
Very quick. Okay. I am obviously not a panelist, but I was just gonna say, I think there's power in numbers, and protesting is honestly how a lot of the major things have gotten done in this country. And I honestly haven't seen a whole lot of stuff talking about that anymore. So I feel like keep talking about it, keep bringing it up, keep sharing it. I haven't seen anything about it as much as I did in the beginning.
So Jim has some, Don has some concluding remarks. And our guests are then heading off to dinner. Students will stay in the vicinity, but we'll take a 15-minute break.
All right, thank you. Thank you all for being here today. And special thanks to our panelists, Catrene, Mark, Ben, and Noam, for sharing their powerful stories with us. The Jewish-Palestinian Dialogue Group was founded in 1992 on the principle that deepening the circle of people-to-people relationships, the foundation of problem-solving of complex issues, and the pathway for dedicated citizens working together towards conflict resolution and the potential for real change. For those who have the courage, process of building people-to-people relationship is the foundation of new ideas and sustainable change based on public involvement, and can be described as the framework for a public peace process. I think this somewhat answers your question. The process challenges the idea of government-centered human security and gives dynamic form to the emerging dynamic of people-centered human security. Today, we have seen dialogue in practice by the panelists and how this process takes root and how the parties begin to identify with each other. Perhaps this seems like a small step, but in fact, it is a major step in the building of a foundation for peace activism that impacts the future. We hope that you will continue to learn about this process of dialogue and building a commitment with just and lasting peace in Israel and Palestine and in all elements of our society. If you wish to learn more about the Jewish-Palestinian Dialogue Group, you can visit our website at www.jewishpalestiniandialogue.org. And I thank you all for being here tonight.